there, submarine fans. This is Eric from the subvet.com. You're listening to a TSV Fast Cast. Can you imagine 50,000 nautical miles of underwater hell with a brand new submarine captain in just 8 months? Well, according to this Navy Times article, Commander Seth Rumler left a trail of destruction in which, in this case, it was not the enemy, but his own crew, with off-script micromanagement leadership failures of epic proportions. Hey there, submarine fans. Welcome to a new TSV segment called Fast Cast. Well, it looks like the fast attack submarine USS Scranton is the next casualty of the U.S. Navy's up-tempo tasking in the South China Sea. But instead of hitting the bottom and causing millions of dollars of damage like the USS Connecticut from last year, this CO caused uncalculated amounts of damage to his entire crew. A chief seeking counseling? The crew cutting corners and hiding reports just to keep him from a tyrannical CEO from frequent verbal on-the-spot outbursts on the crew? There's just too much to unpack here, shipmates and friends, so it's important that you go read the Navy Times article, The Worst Command Inside the Submarine Scranton's Dysfunction. So today on Fastcast, we are bringing on one of our favorite submarine leadership gurus, Commander Ryan Ramsey. Commander Ramsey retired from the United Kingdom's Royal Navy and served from 1991 to 2014. Not only a submarine commander himself, he was also later selected as teacher and commander of the world-renowned submarine command course, the Perisher. Let's bring on Commander Ramsey and get this fast cast underway. So good morning. Well, good morning for me, Commander Ramsey. I guess it's an evening in London, England. So how you doing today?
Yeah, we're good. Everything's good. How about yourself?
Not too bad. I appreciate you coming on board. So I know you've had a chance to jump into this Navy Times article. An investigation team is involved, obviously, which we see in that, and then we have that investigative reporter. So right off the bat, any comments that you've got able to pull out of the article? What might be going on in the USS Scranton that caused this commanding officer to be relieved of command?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. When I used to say that when the people who failed Perisher, the submarine command course, when I taught it, they failed either because they couldn't make decisions or they demonstrate some form of bad behavior. And sometimes during small interactions with the outside world, you can suppress that. But of course, for me, what you see is Scranton on patrol, doing what they do on patrols, with no scrutiny whatsoever. The stress builds up for that particular captain, and he lashes out. And rather than containing that, which is what you need, that steadfast consistency in what you do, you're seeing some really erratic behavior. The other part for me that stands out immediately is that within his chain of command, whether you talk about the XO, the other heads of department, all the way down to senior enlisted, nobody said anything during that period of time to interrupt. They just accepted it. So what it shows is a culture, for me, that doesn't accept criticism very well. And this is how it manifests itself. So basically, it goes unchallenged, or they can't challenge it. They don't feel they can challenge it for fear of whatever the reprisal is. And then you end up in this position here. And so what you've got now is a lot of people who are really damaged by the behaviors of one individual.
So you got a leader here. So just in general, corporation or corporate culture, we see this happening a lot, and it's counterintuitive to in production. So when somebody yells and literally screams, people are very sensitive, and they don't want to report. They're afraid to report automatically because the environment that gets produced out of that when somebody gets upset to that point. So that brings a lot of concern how that could have got on a U.S. submarine. Like you said, it should have been screened out from in the first place. And there's no big secret that there's an up tempo in this region. So I'm just wondering between basic what we know about human biology, because we got all these chemicals running around, and that's what makes us emotional about any particular thing. So it can make people say things they really don't mean. So this commanding officer obviously got through the process. He was qualified for command, so he was definitely good for the job at one point. I'm just wondering if it's the tempo that might be causing this, and what your thoughts might be on
So,
that.
yes, so I think tempo does have something to do with it, but the reality is this is over a prolonged period of time, and so when you do the submarine command course, it's over a short period of time with short interactions, and therefore to see that behavior then is sometimes quite difficult to see. So I've been on many PCO courses in the US, and you see an interaction. They do a set event, and then they stand down. So they can, as long as they can contain that emotional state for that period of time, they're going to get through that. Now they're in a steel tube. It's their steel tube, their home. It's uncontrolled. There's nobody else to, and that emotion just goes raw. And if the guy can't control it, then this is what you see, and the effect is really devastating. So I suspect when they look back, and the guy who did the investigation, Admiral Jablon, I know Admiral Jablon from
Right.
12, really great guy. He would have gone all the way back into, were there some tells early on as a lieutenant, a lieutenant, as we'd say, or a lieutenant commander? What was he like as an XO, and what was a trigger point to turn it into this particular behavior? Because there must be something there before this point. It doesn't just suddenly manifest as a captain. There will be indicators before that this behavior set was there.
Well, since the USS Connecticut happened last year, and I know there's several squadron in that region. Then you got Comp Sub Pack. Do you suspect any issues where they're just not catching? I mean, so I don't have any familiarity. How would they? You got your regular inspections. You have weapons inspections, reactor inspections, all type of stuff. Is it just possible that they're just not catching it, or there could be a problem with the leadership elements?
No, I think so. So having gone through this in my junior career, having served for a captain not dissimilar to what they're sharing there, he could hide it very well when there were sea trainers on board or inspection staff, and he managed to hide it. But as soon as they're gone, then he would revert back to who he was. And I suspect that's what you've seen here. And of course, if there's no internal complaint about it, and no external validation, you can't see anything when you externally get on board. Well, what are you going to do? Because you don't know anything's going on. And so I think the courage, the bit that does take for me is somebody on board there had the courage to stand up and say, this is wrong and I don't want to tolerate it anymore. And because that one person stood up, then others have stood up, and then lo and behold, they've carried out an investigation and found out and upheld what the crew had seen, and that took real courage for the crew. I think for the captain involved, he will probably look back in a different lens to this, and he will probably turn around and say, well, they weren't good enough and they should be better, and all I was doing was trying to hold them to higher standards. But some of the things they describe on there are just nasty. That's all it is. But if he's got if he sets his tone and says, well, I think that's normal, then he sees that as normal. So he's not objectively going out there because he wants to bully or do whatever else. He just thinks that's normal behavior. And it absolutely isn't. It's definitely not acceptable in the 21st century, but it wasn't acceptable in the 20th either.
So it looks like he recently took command of it. So it says Roman took command of the Scranton in November, about the month the fellow submarine Connecticut ran aground. So he's a little over a year experience as a commanding officer, relatively a new commanding officer. Like you said, once he gets in his own tube, he's able to get into his own leadership type style. But we've discussed before, and you've pointed out in a podcast on the Subvets podcast about how important it is to consult with your team. Let your team be professionals. Let the technicians do the technical part, even though you may have a lot of expertise in this thing. But it's important to let them do their part, and then just take in the information and then make a final decision as the commanding officer where you want to go. But in this case, seems like a lot of micromanagement. And there's even there not just the outburst, but there was an incident where somebody was injured, and
Yeah.
then you got your senior non-commissioned officer staff, like E7s and above, that are seeking counseling. So there's a lot of concern. So besides doing what they're designed to do, which is go out to defend U.S. interests, in that area, the biggest enemy is water getting in the people tank. So leadership really has to be on point. It has to be the leader culture, if you will, because the safety or the safe operation of the ship is what I'm getting at here. So, I mean, let alone get into the defensive or war posture. We got to be able to just be able to let submarines safely before we even get into a war situation. So micromanaging to that level or that type of performance, that's really, in my opinion, it's not really his job. That's a like an E5 or an E6, a senior E6 LPO's job or a chief's job to drill down to that point if somebody needs corrective behavior, not on the spot, not on the spot reactive behavior from the commanding officer of ship. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great line in this where it says several engineering duty officers reported that they were dissuaded from reporting things to the CO and did not report minor problems because of his potential reaction. And that tells you everything about lack of consistency, lack of leadership, and lack of empathy and understanding of his crew. So, and what that does is it drives the culture. And what you're doing then is just storing a bigger and bigger problem. And so when you look at Connecticut and collision and how all that stuff happened, or the grounding, whichever way you want to call it, that's because people don't want to talk. And if you don't have an open culture on board your submarine, your steel tube, they're going to hide things. And if they hide things, that leads to some form of issue that you're going to have to deal with later. And it becomes this terminal decline because suddenly you find there's a problem and nobody's told you about it. You then get more angry because they haven't told you. They then feel less inclined to tell you because you're going to get angry depending on because you're always going to respond that way. And that's a downward circle. And the end result, in reality, they're lucky they stopped it at this point. The end result could have been way worse.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at. It could be very disastrous, and I'm very worried and concerned about the readiness of our fleet, because we certainly don't need any submarines sinking literally just because bad leadership alone. So you having the unique background you've been able to ride on submarines of on a multinational scale, like you said, the Dutch, and you've said other navies, and you spent time with the development squadron in the U.S. submarine fleet as well. So would you say that, the way that people produce submarine captains or screen submarine captains is relatively the same, or there's unique differences, like minor unique difference, but it's relatively the same?
Yeah, so I'd say it is relatively the same. And there are, in some cases, unique differences, in other cases, minor differences. What I would say, to put this in perspective, is scale. So the US Navy, 65 SSNs and however many SSBNs you've got versus some of the smaller navies like ourselves with only 5, 6 SSNs and 4 SSBNs. It's much more visible within our Navy. People will know, people will talk. It suddenly becomes very apparent. In a Navy of your scale and size, there will be occasionally incidents like this. And in this particular case, there's been 2 in the last year, which is probably alarming for your Navy. And they'll take measures to make sure that they change that. But if you imagine the number of officers that go through for PCO, that's a tiny percentage. But the effect of that tiny percentage is so significant to a group of people. And that's why it becomes so difficult for people like me, now that I'm retired, but people like me when I was teaching the submarine command course, to make sure that you avoided exactly this by selecting the right people.
Yeah, it takes a lot of hard work just to become a prospective commanding officer, let alone a commanding officer once you make it through the pipeline. So yeah, kind of like where I'm getting at is there a possibility that this could be happening in other fleets?
Yeah, very much so. So I think you have to look at the nation and how they operate. So, for example, if you look at the Russian Navy, there's probably a lot of this goes on, to be quite frank, because that's their culture. If you look at the UK Navy, you'd hope there isn't any of this. The US Navy, you'd hope there isn't any of this, but there's been a couple of pockets, tiny percentage. And that all comes down to the culture. But in general, all the submarine crews, all the submarines I rode around the world, I saw professionally led and professionally run organizations running the most complex platform that military's own. Very rarely did I see the behaviors that are described here. I've experienced the behaviors that were described here, but only once in my submarine career. And my submarine career was 23 years. So, and that sort of puts it into perspective. This is uniquely bad, uniquely wrong, but it's not commonplace across submarine services in the world.
Yeah, that's good to know. I kind of agree with you. I think that this is minor incidents, but we are in very inflammatory times with Russia and China. You know, I mean, we're literally
Yeah.
on the brink of World War III any minute. With Putin said this before. He's willing to use nuclear weapons, and he made a statement yesterday to that effect as well. So I know that goes into not just submarine commands, but all military command cultures. You know, if people they go into this up tempo. People, like, hey, we're getting ready to get into the thick of it, if you will. So I'm just hoping that that training pays off, and how important training and good leadership is, and you know this as well. Not only being an effective leader and trainer, teacher with the UK Navy, but also in your civilian career. So, and we see this a lot too in corporate America. So, I think there's a lot of great takeaways, not only for the U.S. Navy, but there's takeaways that corporate America can do too, because with the failing U.S. dollar and economies across the world, people are going to get uptight, and it's human biology to get upset at the same thing. And you just, instead of letting your leaders under you lead, you want to take control or micromanage. Any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, so I think leading in the most stressful environment, you're right. You can turn around and say everywhere's stressful right now. Every single part, every business that's trying to progress, every organization that appears to be failing at the moment, the constant pressure of potential conflicts and serious world conflict effectively during that period of time adds pressure. But then that's what makes leaders great. That's when you're supposed to steady the ship, calm things down, give people perspective, give people hope where you can give hope, but be realistic with them. But all the way through, you just need to be consistent. And for me, I could be stressed about business, but I never ever share that stress with my employees, because that's not for my team to see. That's for me to deal with. And so you find a way to manage your own frustrations, your own stress, without transferring that onto your employees. And in some areas, there's good stress and bad stress. I used to describe it, but good stress is where you as a team are progressing, and it is quite stressful, the external influences and everything else that's going on. But you as a team are controlling it. That's stressful, but it's good stress. Bad stress is what we're seeing here with this example. We're probably seeing across a lot of businesses where leaders are dealing with wicked problems they've never seen before. They don't know how to tame them, and therefore they can't control the emotion, and therefore they take that on their teams. And that's what every leader now has to avoid, just to calm things down and progress.
I really like what you say, because there's a lot of psychology behind what's going on. It's the leaders we remember that are in history that are able to get through stressful times, just like you said with that, and just have that baseline where you're the same person. You're right, and it's for you to deal with and not let that transfer. And it's easier said than done. I'm not going to say that.
Correct.
I mean, I've certainly have had outbursts too. I mean, I get it. I understand how that could happen, but being able to recognize it and reel it in, that's important in these crazy times we live in. So you can find this article on the Navy Times. I have it posted in the subvet groups, and I'll have this video up with Commander Ramsey, but pretty soon, for this special fast cast on this particular article and issue. And then you're free to comment under where I posted in the social media as well. Any final thoughts, Commander Ramsey?
I think probably the final one is lessons learned, right? So as long as we learn the lessons, or the US Navy learns the lessons from this particular thing, which I'm sure they will, and they continue to progress and continue to evolve, which is really important as we go through this. And probably one final comment: hey, the world's a bit of a strange place at the moment, but good leaders, good teams just stick together and get through it.
Great stuff. Commander Ramsey from the United Kingdom's London. And I thank him for joining today on this special Fast Cast with the Sub Vet. Thank you for being here.